Absolutely, here is the complete cinematic story in one continuous piece, with a strong emotional hook, suspense, redemption, forgiveness, and a satisfying ending. The woman was kneeling beside my wife's grave, clutching a faded photograph of my wife against her chest, and when I asked her who she was, she looked up through tears and whispered the words that made my entire world stop: "He told me to find you." I had buried my wife, Clara Whitmore, 14 months earlier, and I had believed there were no more secrets left between us. I was wrong. There was a stranger at her grave, carrying a photograph I had never seen, grieving for a woman she had never admitted knowing. If you believe in kindness, forgiveness, hope, and second chances, please take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to our channel, because sometimes the person who arrives in the middle of our pain is carrying the answer we have been praying for without even knowing it. Her name was Evelyn Hart, and she looked exhausted in the way people look when grief has become heavier than sleep. She was probably in her early 40s, wearing a simple gray coat despite the warm afternoon, with trembling hands and red eyes. She didn't look like someone who had come to cause trouble. She looked like someone who had been carrying a burden alone for far too long. I stood several feet away, unable to take my eyes from the photograph in her hands. It showed Clara standing beside a young boy near an old wooden fence, smiling in a way I hadn't seen in years. The boy couldn't have been more than 8. Clara had one hand resting gently on his shoulder, and written on the back of the photograph in Clara's unmistakable handwriting were 4 words: "For when you're ready." My heart began pounding. During the last year of Clara's life, I had spent countless hours beside hospital beds, pharmacy counters, rehabilitation rooms, and quiet kitchen tables, watching the woman I loved fight an illness she refused to let define her. I knew her favorite songs, her fear of thunderstorms, the way she always bought too many flowers at the farmer's market, and how she cried whenever she saw an elderly couple holding hands. I thought I knew everything about her. Yet I had never seen that photograph. I had never seen that boy. And I had never heard the name Evelyn Hart. Evelyn slowly stood, wiping her face with the sleeve of her coat. She told me that Clara had asked her, long before she died, to come to my wife's grave only when she was finally brave enough to tell me the truth. She had spent more than a year avoiding the promise because she was terrified of what I might think of her. When I asked what Clara could possibly have wanted from me, Evelyn looked toward the headstone and said that Clara had believed I was the only person who could give her son a future. I felt something inside me crack. Evelyn explained that the boy in the photograph was her son, Lucas. Years earlier, she had been struggling financially after losing her job and becoming the sole parent of a child with serious emotional difficulties following the death of his father. Evelyn had become overwhelmed. She wasn't a cruel mother, she insisted. She was simply drowning. During that period, she had met Clara through a community literacy program where Clara volunteered every Saturday afternoon. Clara had begun helping Lucas with reading, but eventually their relationship became much deeper. Clara never judged Evelyn. She never asked why she couldn't provide more. She simply kept showing up. I listened silently as Evelyn told me something I had never known: Clara had been secretly paying for Lucas's tutoring and school supplies. She had also helped Evelyn find work through a friend and had occasionally left grocery cards in envelopes without putting her name on them. Clara had never told me because, according to Evelyn, she didn't want her kindness to become something she could take credit for. That sounded exactly like my wife. But then Evelyn revealed the part that hurt. Several months before Clara became seriously ill, Lucas had gotten into trouble at school after being bullied. He had reacted badly, and the situation had spiraled until social services became involved. Evelyn panicked. She was afraid Lucas would be taken away. Clara had promised to help her, but shortly afterward Clara discovered the illness that would eventually take her life. Her world became filled with doctors, treatments, pain, and uncertainty. Still, she didn't abandon Evelyn. Instead, Clara had written letters. Dozens of them. Letters to Lucas for birthdays she might never see. Letters for the day he graduated. Letters for the day he felt worthless. Letters for the day he fell in love. Letters for the day he became a father. She had carefully placed them in a box and given them to Evelyn with strict instructions. Then Clara had made one final request. If something happened to her, Evelyn was supposed to find me. I could barely breathe. I asked why Clara had never told me about any of this. Evelyn looked ashamed and admitted that she had begged Clara not to tell me because she believed I would think she was taking advantage of my wife. Clara had apparently told her that I would never see kindness as a weakness. But Evelyn hadn't trusted that. She had spent 14 months believing I would hate her. I didn't. What I felt instead was grief, anger, and a strange kind of admiration for the woman I thought I already knew. Evelyn then reached into her bag and pulled out a small wooden box. She handed it to me with both hands. The box was scratched along the edges and held together with a tiny brass latch. My name was written across the top in Clara's handwriting. My knees nearly gave way. I sat on the stone bench beside the grave and opened it. Inside were envelopes. Dozens of them. Some had dates written on the front. Some had only simple instructions: open when he needs courage. Open when he thinks he's alone. Open when he forgets who he is. One envelope had my name on it and a date that had already passed. My hands shook as I opened it. Clara's letter began by saying that if I was reading it, then she had probably failed to tell me something important while she was alive. She apologized, but not for helping Evelyn. She apologized for allowing me to believe that loving someone meant knowing every detail of their life. She wrote that marriage wasn't ownership. It wasn't about possessing every secret. It was about trusting the heart of the person beside you. Then she wrote something that destroyed the last wall I had built around my grief. She said she knew I would blame myself for all the things I couldn't fix. She knew I would remember every hospital conversation, every argument about treatment, every moment I had wished I could trade places with her. She wanted me to stop. She wanted me to understand that I hadn't failed her. I had loved her. And sometimes love couldn't save someone from dying. But it could save someone else from believing they were alone. That was why she wanted me to meet Lucas. I looked at Evelyn and asked where he was. She hesitated before telling me he was waiting in her car across the cemetery entrance. For the first time, fear appeared on my face. I wasn't prepared to meet the child who had occupied a hidden corner of my wife's heart. But I walked with Evelyn anyway. Lucas was sitting in the back seat, staring down at his hands. He was 14 now, taller than the boy in the photograph, but I could still see the same sadness in his eyes. When he noticed me, he immediately looked away. I opened the car door and sat beside him. For several seconds, neither of us said anything. Then he quietly asked whether I was angry. I told him I wasn't. He asked whether I hated his mother. Again, I told him no. Then he finally looked at me and asked the question that made me understand just how much Clara had meant to him. He wanted to know if she had ever talked about him after she got sick. I took Clara's letter from my pocket and told him that she had talked about him until the very end. Lucas began crying. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just silent tears rolling down his cheeks while he tried desperately to wipe them away. I placed my hand on his shoulder. For the first time since Clara's death, I felt something other than emptiness. I felt responsibility. Not because Clara had asked me to replace anyone. Not because Lucas needed another father. But because Clara had trusted me with something precious. Over the next several weeks, Evelyn and Lucas became part of my life in a way none of us expected. I didn't become some perfect hero. There were awkward moments, disagreements, misunderstandings, and days when grief made me impatient. Evelyn was protective of Lucas, and I sometimes felt she was waiting for me to change my mind and disappear. But slowly, trust grew. I helped Lucas repair an old bicycle. He helped me clean out Clara's garden shed. Evelyn brought groceries on Saturdays, and eventually those visits turned into long afternoons around my kitchen table. One afternoon, Lucas found an old box of Clara's gardening tools. He held up a pair of worn gloves and smiled for the first time. He told me Clara had once promised to teach him how to grow tomatoes. I looked at the empty garden behind the house and realized the soil had been untouched since her death. So the following Saturday, we planted tomatoes. Then peppers. Then sunflowers. Evelyn joined us. It wasn't some miraculous healing. The grief didn't disappear. But something changed. The house stopped feeling like a museum dedicated to someone who was gone. It began feeling like a place where her kindness was still alive. Months later, Evelyn confessed something she had been hiding from me. She had considered leaving town with Lucas because she believed she was taking too much from me. She thought I was helping them only because Clara had asked me to. I told her she was wrong. Clara may have opened the door. But I had chosen to keep it open. That distinction mattered. Evelyn cried when I said it. She admitted she had spent years believing that accepting help made her weak. Clara had tried to teach her otherwise. Now I finally understood what Clara had been trying to do. She wasn't just helping Evelyn survive. She was teaching her how to accept love without believing she had to earn it first. The biggest surprise came the following spring. Lucas received an acceptance letter to an advanced technical program he had dreamed about attending. He had worked incredibly hard, but when he opened the envelope, he immediately began crying because the first person he wanted to tell was Clara. We drove to the cemetery that afternoon. The sun was warm, the grass was green, and the trees moved gently in the breeze. Lucas placed his acceptance letter against Clara's headstone. Then he stepped back. Evelyn stood beside him. I stood on the other side. For a while, none of us spoke. Then Lucas said something that I would remember for the rest of my life. He said that he used to think Clara had disappeared when she died. Now he understood that she had simply left pieces of herself inside the people she loved. I looked at my wife's name carved into the stone and finally understood. Clara had not left me with nothing. She had left me a garden. She had left me letters. She had left me people. She had left me a reason to keep waking up and choosing kindness even on the days when grief told me there was no point. Before we left, Evelyn placed the original photograph beside the flowers. She had brought it because she believed I should have it. I told her to keep it. She shook her head. She said Clara had wanted me to have it eventually. So I accepted it. On the back, beneath the words, "For when you're ready," I noticed something I had never seen before. There was another sentence written in smaller handwriting. It said, "He'll understand when he learns that love is bigger than loss." I stood there with tears running down my face. For 14 months, I had thought the hardest thing in life was losing my wife. But standing there with Evelyn and Lucas, I realized the hardest thing had been believing that my story ended when hers did. It hadn't. Clara's final gift wasn't another secret. It was a second beginning. And sometimes, the people who arrive carrying the deepest pain are not there to reopen our wounds. Sometimes, they arrive carrying the part of our heart we thought we had lost forever. Years later, Lucas became an engineer, exactly as he had dreamed. Evelyn opened a small community employment center to help struggling parents find work, inspired by the woman who had once helped her when she had nowhere to turn. And I continued tending Clara's garden. Every spring, I planted sunflowers along the cemetery path. Not because I wanted to stay trapped in the past. But because I had finally learned that remembering someone doesn't mean refusing to move forward. It means carrying what was beautiful with you as you walk forward. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, leave a meaningful comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another emotional journey. And before you go, leave a comment telling us this: have you ever received unexpected kindness at the moment you needed it most, and did it change the direction of your life? Because sometimes one act of kindness becomes a bridge between two broken hearts. Sometimes forgiveness gives people permission to begin again. And sometimes, the stranger crying beside a grave isn't there because they came to mourn the person you lost. They're there because that person loved them enough to make sure you wouldn't have to grieve alone.